Welcome to Echoes of the Midnight, where darkness whispers tales of the unknown and shadows hold secrets that chill the soul. Dive into haunting stories that linger long after the clock strikes 12. Here, every echo carries a spine-tingling mystery waiting to unfold. Now, dim the lights, let the midnight whispers begin, and step into the shadows of our story.
The first snow of the season blanketed the quiet suburban neighborhood, casting everything in a soft, glittering white. The Miller family's house, with its red shutters and strings of twinkling lights, looked like a picture-perfect holiday postcard. Inside, the warm glow of the fireplace danced across ornaments and garlands as the family prepared for their cherished tradition. Blanketed, trimmed with tradition. 8-year-old Emily Miller darted through the house, her brown curls bouncing with every step. Her excitement was boundless. "We need more candy canes on the tree. And what about the Santa pillows? Did you find them, Mum?" Kneeling by a box of decorations, Sarah Miller carefully unwrapped a ceramic angel. Her auburn hair, tied back in a messy bun, caught the light as she chuckled softly. "I'm getting there, Em. Why don't you help your dad in the attic?" "Attic duty?" Michael called from the hallway, his tone playful. He poked his head around the corner, his hair disheveled from wrestling with a stubborn string of lights. "Oh, Emily, I'm recruiting you. It's a jungle up there." Emily giggled, her slippered feet sliding slightly on the hardwood floor. "I'll help you, Daddy," she declared, dashing to his side. Up in the attic, dust floated lazily in the beam of Michael's flashlight as he rummaged through old boxes. Emily stood on tiptoes, peering into every container with wide-eyed curiosity. "What's in this one? Or this one?" she asked, her small hands reaching eagerly. "Careful, kiddo," Michael warned. "Some of this stuff hasn't seen daylight in years. I don't want you sneezing up a storm before we finish the tree." Ignoring him, Emily tugged at a large cardboard box tucked in the corner. The tape sealing it was brittle, and the edges had yellowed with age. "What about this one?" she asked. Michael shrugged, intrigued. "No idea. Could be from the last owners. Let's check it out." As they prized it open, Emily let out a delighted squeal. Inside was a jumble of old Christmas decorations, faded ribbons, cracked ornaments, and tangled lights. But at the bottom was something peculiar. A smaller box, wrapped in peeling red paper and tied with a faded gold ribbon. Emily's eyes sparkled as she held it up. "It's a present." Michael frowned slightly, then chuckled. "Go ahead, open it. Let's see what's inside." With careful hands, Emily untied the ribbon and peeled back the paper. Her face lit up as she revealed a tiny elf on the shelf. Its red felt suit was frayed, and its porcelain face bore faint cracks. The painted grin looked oddly fixed. Too wide, too permanent. Its faded blue eyes glinted even in the dim attic light. "Look, Dad," Emily exclaimed, holding the elf high. "It's an elf. Can we keep him?" Michael hesitated, then shrugged. He's seen better days. "But sure, why not? Let's show your mum." Downstairs, Emily placed the elf triumphantly on the coffee table. "Mom, look what we found!" Sarah glanced up, her smile faltering as her gaze fell on the elf. Something about it gave her pause. The crooked grin, the faintly cracked paint. "Where did that come from?" she asked, her voice tinged with unease. "The attic," Emily said proudly. "I named him Jingles. Can we put him on the mantel?" Sarah hesitated, her unease evident. "Honey, he's a little old. Maybe we should leave him in the box." "No!" Emily cried, clutching the elf protectively. "He's special. Please, Mom, I want him to be part of Christmas." Michael chimed in, draping an arm around Sarah's shoulder. "It's just an elf, Sarah. Let her have some fun." "Hello?" Reluctantly, Sarah nodded. "All right, but just this year." She softened her tone as she turned to Emily. "Be careful with him, okay? He looks fragile." Grinning, Emily placed Jingles on the mantel, right in the center where the stockings hung. "Perfect," she declared, stepping back to admire her work. That night, the Miller house glowed with the soft light of the Christmas tree. As Emily headed upstairs, she whispered to Jingles, "Don't move while I'm asleep, okay?" She giggled and ran off to bed. The house settled into silence. The faint hum of the heater was the only sound. But as the clock struck midnight, a soft creak echoed through the living room. The stockings swayed gently, though no windows were open. On the mantel, Jingles sat where Emily had left him, except now his head was tilted ever so slightly to the left, as if watching. By midnight, the house was still and silent. The occasional creak of the wooden floors broke the quiet, the kind of sound old houses make as they settle into the cold. But then, faintly, came something else, a sound so soft it was almost imperceptible, the light patter of tiny footsteps. Sarah stirred in her sleep. Her heart raced, though she wasn't sure what had woken her. Lying still, she scanned the dark room with wide eyes. It had sounded like a giggle, distant and faint, but disturbingly childlike. "Michael," she whispered, nudging her husband's shoulder. Michael groaned, barely lifting his head from the pillow. "What is it?" he muttered, half asleep. "Did you hear that?" Sarah's voice was low but urgent as she strained to catch the sound again. Hear what Michael mumbled, already slipping back into sleep. Sarah hesitated. The house was silent again, save for the steady hum of the heater. She shook her head, lying back down. Nothing. Must have been my imagination. Downstairs, the living room appeared undisturbed at first glance. The stockings hung neatly, the Christmas tree lights blinked softly, and the space seemed untouched. But Jingles was no longer on the mantel. Instead, he sat perched on the armrest of the couch, his porcelain face tilted upward toward the staircase leading to the bedrooms. The next morning, Emily bounded into the living room, her slippers skidding on the hardwood floor. She stopped abruptly, her eyes going wide. "Mom. Dad. Come look," she yelled, her voice ringing through the house. Sarah, wrapped in her robe and clutching a steaming mug of coffee, appeared in the doorway. "What's all the yelling about?" she asked, her tone groggy. Emily pointed at the couch. "Jingles." He moved. Sarah's gaze landed on the elf. Her frown deepened as she walked closer. "Emily, did you move him last night?" "No, I swear I didn't touch him," Emily said, her brown eyes filled with wonder. "He's magic, Mom. I told you he's special." Michael shuffled into the room, yawning as he ruffled his hair. What's all the excitement? His gaze fell on Jingles, and he chuckled. "Looks like our little friend decided he wanted a better view." Sarah shot him a pointed look. "Michael, did you move it?" Michael shook his head, grinning. "Not me. Must have been Emily." "I didn't," Emily insisted, crossing her arms. "He moved on his own. Jingles talks to me, you know." That caught Sarah's attention. "What do you mean he talks to you?" she asked, her voice tightening. Emily grinned, bouncing on her toes. "He tells me secrets, but I can't tell you their secrets, silly." Sarah's unease grew, her eyes narrowing at the elf. "Emily, it's just a toy. It can't talk." "Yes, he can," Emily said, her tone insistent. She scooped Jingles up and hugged him tightly. "You just don't listen hard enough." Over the next few days, strange things began happening. Small objects disappeared, a pair of Sarah's earrings, the TV remote, even the dog's collar. Emily found the collar stuffed into a kitchen drawer and giggled, claiming Jingles must have been playing a game. At night, Sarah started hearing faint noises, soft giggles, and what sounded like tiny footsteps scurrying through the dark. Each morning, Jingles would be in a new spot. Once he was found at the dining table, a spoon propped awkwardly in his small porcelain hand. Another time, he dangled from the chandelier, his crooked grin gleaming eerily in the dim morning light. Michael dismissed it all with a laugh. "It's just Emily playing around," he said, brushing off Sarah's concerns. But Sarah wasn't convinced. Emily's bond with the elf was growing stronger, and her insistence that Jingles could talk was becoming unnerving. One evening, as Emily cradled Jingles on the couch, she looked up at her mother with a serious expression. "Mum," she said quietly, "he doesn't like it when you don't believe in him." Sarah froze mid-step. "What do you mean?" Emily's brown eyes held an unusual intensity. "He told me. He doesn't like it when people are mean to him." A chill ran through Sarah. She stared at Jingles, her mind racing. For a fleeting moment, she could have sworn the elf's grin widened, as if mocking her hesitation. That night, Sarah lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She tried to dismiss the creeping fear that gnawed at her thoughts. But as the house fell into its familiar stillness, the faint giggle came again, soft and distant, echoing through the shadows. Downstairs, in the dim glow of the Christmas tree, Jingles sat on the couch, his head tilted slightly to the side. His faded blue eyes seemed to glint faintly, watching, waiting. By the third morning, Sarah's unease had grown into full-blown suspicion. Jingles was found sitting in the pantry, nestled among the cereal boxes, his chipped blue eyes gleaming faintly in the dim light. Emily squealed with delight at the discovery, clutching the elf like a cherished companion. "Mum, he's so funny. He must have gotten hungry in the middle of the night," Emily said, giggling as she hugged Jingles to her chest. Sarah forced a thin smile, her stomach twisting. "Emily, are you sure you're not moving him?" she asked, her tone sharper than intended. Emily frowned, her bright eyes narrowing. "Why would I do that?" "I told you he moves on his own." Michael wandered into the kitchen, scratching his head as he yawned. "Maybe we've got a prankster ghost," he joked, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "Or maybe Emily's got a secret talent for redecorating." "I'm not sneaky," Emily protested, her voice indignant. She cradled Jingles protectively. "He doesn't like it when you say stuff like that." Sarah stiffened, her attention snapping to her daughter. "What do you mean, Emily? What doesn't he like?" Emily shrugged casually, her grin returning. "He told me." That evening, after tucking Emily into bed, Sarah and Michael lingered in the living room. The Christmas tree lights blinked rhythmically, casting soft shadows across the walls. Jingles sat back on the mantel, perched innocently between the stockings. "We need to figure this out," Sarah said, her voice low but firm. "There's something wrong with that thing." Michael leaned back on the couch, his expression skeptical. "It's just a toy, Sarah. Emily's having fun with it. What's the harm?" "This isn't fun," Sarah snapped. "Finding him in weird places? Emily claiming he talks to her? Michael, this isn't normal." Michael sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Fine. How about this, we set up a camera? If it's Emily moving him, we'll catch her in the act. If not," he trailed off, his grin fading slightly. "Well, then we'll know." Reluctantly, Sarah agreed. That night, they placed a small camera on a shelf, its lens trained on the mantel where Jingles sat. The house settled into silence as they turned in for the night. Sarah woke early the next morning, her heart pounding with anticipation or dread. She slipped downstairs quietly, retrieving the camera with trembling hands. Michael joined her in the kitchen, groggy but curious. "Let's see what our little friend's been up to," he said, pouring coffee as Sarah set up the footage. For several minutes, the video showed nothing unusual, just the softly blinking tree lights and the stillness of the room. Then, movement. At first, it was subtle. Jingles' head tilted slightly, almost imperceptibly. Then, with jerky, unnatural movements, his arms shifted. Sarah gasped as the elf climbed down from the mantel, its tiny limbs moving awkwardly but deliberately. It crawled across the floor, its chipped porcelain face turning upward to stare directly into the camera. For a moment, it held the gaze, its cracked grin stretching wider. The screen flickered and the footage cut to black. Michael's coffee cup clattered onto the table, spilling liquid across the surface. What the hell was that, he whispered, his voice hoarse. Sarah sat frozen, her heart racing. Slowly, she turned her gaze toward the mantel. Jingles was gone. "Michael," she choked out. "Where is he?" They searched the house frantically and found Jingles in Emily's room, perched on her bedside table. Emily was still asleep, her arms wrapped tightly around her pillow. When Michael reached for the elf, Emily stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Don't touch him," she cried sharply, her small hands snatching Jingles away. She held him close, her gaze defensive. "He doesn't like it when you touch him." "Emily," Sarah began, her voice trembling, "did you move him last night?" Emily glared at her mother, her expression uncharacteristically serious. "I told you he moves on his own. He said he doesn't trust you." Michael stepped back, his face pale. "This isn't normal," he muttered. "Sarah, what do we do?" That afternoon, while Emily played outside, Sarah climbed into the attic. The air was thick with dust, the dim light filtering through cracks in the wooden slats. She rummaged through the boxes, her flashlight cutting through the gloom, until she found it a leather-bound journal. Its cover was cracked and aged, the name Harold Whittaker scrawled across the first page in faded ink. Flipping through the entries, Sarah's unease deepened with every word. Harold Whittaker had been a toy maker, a brilliant craftsman, but a bitter and vengeful man. The journal spoke of infusing his creations with dark energy, cursing them to bring misery to the families who embraced them. Sarah's hands trembled as she read the final entry. This one is special. It will watch. It will learn. It will take what is most precious. She slammed the book shut, her pulse racing. Clutching the journal tightly, she descended the attic stairs, her mind swirling with questions and fear. Who or what had they invited into their home? Sarah sat at the kitchen table, the leather-bound journal open before her. Its brittle, yellowed pages were covered in cramped handwriting that told a story far more sinister than she could have imagined. The faint morning light streaming through the window cast long shadows, adding to the growing weight in her chest. She had spent hours poring over the journal, piecing together the life of Harold Whittaker. Once a celebrated toy maker, his life had spiraled into tragedy and bitterness. He wrote of his family's loss, of the happiness he could no longer bear to witness in others. His creations, once beloved by children, became vessels of malice, infused, as he claimed, with dark energy, meant to drain joy from those who embraced them. Sarah's eyes locked onto one particularly chilling passage. This one is special. It will not simply observe, it will bond. It will charm, and when the time is right, it will take what is most precious. Her thoughts were interrupted by Emily's laughter drifting in from the living room. It was the kind of laugh that usually warmed Sarah's heart, but now it sent chills down her spine. Closing the journal, she hurried to the living room, her pulse quickening. Emily was sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by crayons and sheets of paper. She was humming softly, her curly brown hair falling over her face as she worked on her latest drawing. Jingle sat in her lap, his crooked grin tilted toward her. "What are you drawing, sweetie?" Sarah asked, forcing calm into her voice. Emily looked up, her eyes bright with excitement. "It's Jingles," she said, holding up her picture. Sarah's breath caught. The drawing, though simple, was unmistakable. It showed Jingles sitting on the couch, his grin stretched unnaturally wide. Shadowy tendrils extended from his small body, curling outward like dark vines. Other drawings showed their house, but the windows and walls were marked with strange symbols. The same jagged shape Sarah had found faintly scratched on their windows that morning. "Emily," Sarah said carefully, holding up the drawing, "where did you see these symbols?" Emily shrugged, still smiling. "Jingles showed me. He says they're important." Later that day, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time she passed a window, she caught flickers of movement in her peripheral vision. But when she turned to look, there was nothing there, just her own pale, anxious reflection staring back. The symbols Emily had drawn weren't confined to her pictures. Sarah found faint scratches on the living room windows, the kitchen glass, and even the bathroom mirror. They were crude and jagged, as if etched by tiny sharp claws. She called Michael to look, but he waved it off. "Probably just old scratches we never noticed," he said, his voice light in an attempt to calm her. "You're letting this Jingles thing get to you." "Michael!" Sarah snapped, her voice trembling with frustration. "This isn't normal. Look at Emily. She's drawing these things. She's talking about secrets and symbols. This isn't her imagination." Michael sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Okay, maybe it's a little weird, but she's a kid. Kids have overactive imaginations. Let's not jump to conclusions." Sarah clenched her jaw, her frustration mounting. She didn't argue, but later that night, she returned to the journal. Her fingers trembled as she flipped through the pages again, her eyes drawn to the same ominous phrase, "It will take what is most precious." When bedtime came, Emily refused to sleep without Jingles. Sarah tried to convince her to leave the elf downstairs, but Emily clutched him tightly, her brown eyes narrowing with an intensity Sarah had never seen before. "Keeps me safe," Emily said firmly. "He doesn't like it when you say mean things about him." "Emily," Sarah said softly, her voice shaking, "he's just a toy. He can't keep you safe." "Yes, he can," Emily whispered, her grip tightening on Jingles. "He told me." Sarah barely slept that night. Her dreams were filled with glowing symbols etched into the walls, wrapping around her family like suffocating vines. She woke with a start, her heart racing, and decided to check on Emily. The house was eerily silent as she crept down the hallway. Emily's door was ajar, and a faint glow spilled into the hallway. Pushing the door open, Sarah froze. Emily was sitting up in bed, wide awake. She was drawing again, her crayon scratching the paper with unnerving precision. The symbols were more intricate this time, almost alive. Jingle sat on her pillow, his cracked porcelain face tilted toward the door, as if he had been expecting her. "Emily, what are you doing?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Emily didn't look up. "He's showing me what to do." "What do you mean?" Sarah stepped closer, her legs shaking. Finally, Emily looked at her, her bright brown eyes shadowed by something darker. "He says we have to finish the symbols before Christmas. Then everything will be perfect." Sarah's breath hitched. Clutching the journal, she backed out of the room. Whatever was happening, she knew one thing for certain. Jingles was not just a toy, and whatever he was planning, it had to be stopped before it was too late. Snow fell silently outside, blanketing the Miller house in an almost serene stillness. But inside, the atmosphere was anything but calm. Sarah paced the living room, her light green eyes darting to the clock on the wall. Midnight was approaching, and Emily was nowhere to be found. "Michael, we need to check her room again," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "I've already looked," Michael replied, his usual cheer replaced by worry. "She's not there." "She's not anywhere upstairs." "Then where is she?" Sarah snapped, panic rising in her chest. Her gaze flicked to the mantel, where Jingles usually sat, but the elf was gone. Suddenly, a faint giggle echoed through the house. Both parents froze. The sound was high-pitched and cold, not Emily's laughter, but something far darker. It sent a chill racing down Sarah's spine. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Michael nodded, his face pale. It came from the basement. Cautiously, they descended the creaking stairs. Michael's flashlight cast long, flickering beams of light across the dark space. At the bottom, they noticed a strange, unnatural glow seeping from under the storage room door. Michael pushed the door open, and both parents gasped. The room had transformed. The floor was covered in jagged, glowing symbols, their sickly green hue pulsing like a heartbeat. At the center of the room, surrounded by a perfect circle of glowing elves, sat Emily. Her curly brown hair framed her face, but her usually bright eyes were dull, almost lifeless. She cradled Jingles in her lap, as though he were her most prized possession. "Emily," Sarah shouted, rushing forward. But she stopped short as one of the elves turned its head sharply toward her, its chipped blue eyes locking onto her. A low, growling hiss filled the room, and the other elves began to stir. "Mummy?" Emily said, her voice distant and hollow. "You shouldn't be here. Jingles says it's not safe." Sarah's voice trembled. "Emily, we're taking you out of here." Emily shook her head slowly, her grip tightening on the elf. "I can't leave. Jingles says we have to stay until it's done." "Until what's done?" Michael demanded, stepping forward, his voice cracking. Emily looked down at Jingles, her hands stroking his fraying red felt suit. "He says it's almost time. Just a little more." The elves began to rise, their movements jerky and unnatural, their porcelain faces twisted as cracks spread across them, revealing dark voids beneath. One by one, they turned towards Sarah and Michael, their glowing blue eyes fixed on the intruders. Suddenly, chaos erupted. The elves lunged, their tiny limbs moving with shocking speed. One latched onto Sarah's shoulder, its cracked hands clawing at her hair. She screamed, trying to shake it off, while another clung to Michael's leg, its sharp fingers digging into his skin. "Get them off!" Sarah yelled, her voice cracking with fear. Michael swung the flashlight, smashing one of the elves against the wall. It shattered into pieces, but as it broke, the others grew stronger, their movements more coordinated and vicious. "They're feeding off each other," Sarah cried, struggling to pry one off her arm. Michael's eyes darted to the fireplace upstairs, and a desperate idea took shape. "We need to destroy Jingles," he shouted. "They're connected to him." Sarah hesitated, her eyes locking on Emily, who sat unmoving in the circle. "Emily, please," Sarah begged. "Let me take him." Emily looked up, her face a mixture of sadness and fear. "He says you can't." But Michael didn't wait. He lunged forward, grabbing Jingles from Emily's hands. The moment the elf left her grasp, the room erupted in an ear-splitting screech. The glowing symbols flared brighter, and the elves writhed, their movements frantic and chaotic. "Michael, hurry!" Sarah screamed as the remaining elves swarmed toward him. Michael sprinted up the stairs, clutching Jingles tightly. The elf's porcelain head twisted in his grip, its crooked grin seeming to stretch wider. Reaching the living room, Michael hurled Jingles into the roaring fireplace. Flames engulfed the elf instantly. The moment Jingles began to burn, the house fell silent. The glowing symbols vanished, and the remaining elves crumbled into piles of ash. Downstairs, Emily blinked slowly, her eyes clearing as though waking from a long, dark dream. "Mummy?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "What happened?" Sarah rushed to her daughter, pulling her into a tight embrace, tears streaming down her face. "It's over," she murmured, stroking Emily's hair. "It's over." Michael stumbled back into the basement, soot smudged across his face. "Is everyone okay?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Sarah nodded, holding Emily close. "We're okay," she said, though her heart still raced. But as the family huddled together in the dim light, The fire in the fireplace flickered unnaturally. For a brief moment, a faint, cold laugh echoed through the room, and a single ember danced upward, landing on the hearth. Sarah's eyes widened, and she whispered, "It's not over." Christmas morning dawned with a serene quiet, the kind of stillness that follows a storm. Snow continued to fall gently, blanketing the street in pristine white. Inside the Miller house, the air was heavy with exhaustion but tinged with relief. For the first time in days, it seemed like the nightmare was over. Sarah stirred in her bed, her mind replaying the events of the night before. The glowing symbols, the vicious elves, and Jingle's lifelike movements felt like fragments of a fever dream. But the faint scratches on her arms and the soot-streaked floors reminded her it had been all too real. She glanced at the clock. 7:30 a.m. Time to face Christmas morning. In the kitchen, Michael had already started the coffee, his face weary but calmer than it had been in days. Sarah joined him, her auburn hair loose and unkempt. Her light green eyes scanned the room, almost instinctively searching for anything out of place. "Emily's still asleep," Michael said quietly. "Figured we'd let her rest. She's been through a lot." Sarah nodded, exhaling deeply. "We all have." They sat in silence for a while, sipping their coffee as the Christmas tree lights blinked softly in the living room. For a brief moment, they allowed themselves to believe it was over, that the horror had burned away with Jingles. Eventually, Emily shuffled downstairs, dragging her favorite blanket behind her. Her curly brown hair was wild from sleep, and her bright brown eyes were clear again, free of the shadow that had darkened them for days. Sarah pulled her into a tight hug. "Good morning, sweetheart," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Merry Christmas." Emily smiled softly. "Merry Christmas, Mummy. Did Santa come?" Michael chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. "Why don't we check?" The family gathered around the tree, its lights casting a warm, nostalgic glow. The presents sat neatly beneath it, each one carefully wrapped. Emily crouched down to search for her name tags, her small hands sorting through the colourful boxes. But then she stopped abruptly, her entire body stiffening. "Mummy," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Look." Sarah and Michael leaned closer, their smiles fading as they followed Emily's gaze. Sitting beneath the tree, nestled between the presents, was a pristine elf on the shelf. It was identical to Jingle's red felt suit, white trim, and a porcelain face with the same crooked grin. Its blue eyes, chipped and glinting, seemed to gleam in the soft light. Michael swore under his breath, stepping back instinctively. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, her breathing quickening. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, no, no, we destroyed him." Emily reached out hesitantly, her small hands trembling. "Is it him?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Don't touch it," Sarah snapped, grabbing Emily's wrist and pulling her back. The elf sat motionless, its grin frozen, but its presence was suffocating. It felt as though the air in the room had thickened, the warmth of Christmas morning replaced by an icy dread. Sarah turned to Michael, her voice urgent. "We need to get rid of it, now." Michael hesitated, his eyes fixed on the elf. "What if it's just a coincidence? What if we're imagining things? Do you really want to take that chance? Sarah shot back, her voice sharp with fear. Michael grabbed an empty box from the corner and moved cautiously toward the tree. He reached for the elf, his hands shaking, but the moment his fingers touched it, the lights on the tree flickered violently, plunging the room into jarring darkness. For a heartbeat, all was still. When the lights returned, the elf was gone. The family froze, their eyes darting around the room. Emily clung to Sarah, her small body trembling. "Where is it?" she whimpered. A faint giggle echoed through the house, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was the same cold, unsettling sound they'd heard before. The family huddled together, their breaths shallow, as the sound faded into silence. Outside, the snow continued to fall, peaceful and undisturbed, but in houses across the neighborhood, elves identical to Jingles sat perched on mantels, nestled under trees, or tucked onto shelves. Their porcelain faces were cracked, their grins unnervingly wide. One by one, their chipped blue eyes glinted faintly in the soft glow of holiday lights, as if awakening.
Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe for more. See you next time.